No one loves in a government charging more for the services they provide. But what is proposed in the bill in front of the House is a proportionate response to a serious problem. A proportionate response to a serious problem. So let's start with the problem that has to be solved here. The problem is in three parts. First of all, there's clearly not enough money being spent on our infrastructure across the nation at the moment. We've had various estimates of an infrastructure spending gap of between $455 and $700 billion. $455 and $700 billion. That's almost half of the whole GDP of the country in 1 year. And Infrastructure Australia has come up with $70 billion of priority infrastructure projects. More locally for me, it's very clear that we need serious spending on the Barton Highway as we move it towards duplication between Yass and Canberra. My local roads, as a cyclist, I know almost every bump, and we know how much has to be spent on those. And meanwhile, the degradation in our rail system is evidenced by the conveyor belt of containers coming down the Hume Highway each evening, particularly on Sunday evenings. Out in the western part of my electorate, grain growers are now paying north of $50 a tonne to move their grain to port because of the failures in our rail system. So not enough money is being spent on our infrastructure. Secondly, roads are the last utility to not have hypothecated service charges. So if we look at water, if we look at electricity, if we look at rail, if we look at telecommunications, they all charge directly for their services and roads don't. So we're in a situation where the government has to fund roads from consolidated revenue, and the continual tussle has become a serious issue. And of course that leads to the third problem, which is that our current fuel excise is not indexed and therefore gets left behind. And in fact, if we want to look at the facts on this, we see that between 1994 and 2011, total excise as a proportion of GDP fell from 2% down to 1.2%. So that effectively had an impact on our ability to fund road projects. And in fuel terms, if you go back to 2001, the excise was 42% of the fuel price, and it fell down by 2011 to 25%. So we clearly have an issue. Now, when we look at what the experts say, they're pretty clear about this. And I'll read from an excellent Infrastructure Partnerships Australia report commissioned by them and completed by Deloitte, where they say it is widely accepted that the current approach to road pricing is unsustainable. A range of bodies, including Infrastructure Australia, the Productivity Commission, the National Transport Commission and Commonwealth Treasury, have concluded that the system requires substantial change. The Henry Review, Labor's own review when they were in government, correctly concluded that the current taxation settings for the nation's road would prove unsustainable in the longer term. The Henry Review attributed the decline in the fuel excise revenue to the cessation of indexation in 2001, which has been compounded by other causes such as increasing efficiency of the vehicle fleet. So this is a serious problem that the experts understand that we need to fix. Now, it's clear that Labor and the Greens want to get in the way, and it seems that they want to get in the way of just about everything at the moment, but clearly this is an area where they seem to be showing resistance. The Greens have already come clean on that by creating some bizarre connection between this bill and not supporting public transport. I can't get my head around that. Last time I looked, buses used fuel, but nonetheless, that seems to be where they're going. And if we go to the Labor Party, they too have shown the early signs of wanting to resist this bill. I will remind them, though, that their former governments, in particular Treasurer Paul Keating, made his view very clear on this issue. In fact, he said back in his budget speech in 1983 that when they first introduced fuel excise indexation, that this measure will allow for the maintenance of the real value of excise rates in a non-destabilising fashion. And then later in 1984, he said that by adjusting excises for inflation each half year, as this government has done since the last budget, every 6 months they are adjusted for inflation. The real value of the tax does not change. And of course, Labor were about to introduce a carbon tax on heavy vehicles from July